Hey everybody, John Fenn here, Church Without Walls International, CWOWI.org, and our EU website, CWOWI.eu. Go to our website, the CWOWI.org, sign up for my weekly thoughts, watch the videos about House Church. You know, we're a House Church network. It's not a miniature of the auditorium. There's not one person sharing every single week. We take turns, we share responsibility of hosting and leading, and we grow the same way that they did in the early church. You know, they started with 120 people, and then they saturated the Roman Empire in under 300 years because you've got a nucleus of people who are used to hosting and leading. And so when you outgrow a home, you just multiply out and start hosting and rotating among yourselves and taking turns. It's all about Christ in us, that we are living, breathing temples of God. So we share what Christ is doing in us. All right, CWOWI.org. Today, talking about the two witnesses. You know, the Bible tells us who the two witnesses are. And yet today on the internet, you've got people running around saying, I'm one of the two witnesses, or the two witnesses are over there, or I had a vision, or I had a dream. You know, I walked with the Father now about 50 years, and going back to 1978 was the first time I encountered a couple of people who claimed to be the two witnesses. They weren't. and the Bible's very clear who they are. So let's get into it. It's very simple. First off, understand, what is the book of the Revelation about? It is what verse 1 tells you. It is the revelation which God the Father gave to his Son, Jesus Christ, to give to his saints, his followers, to know that things would happen at the end times or in the future times. So it's about Israel. It's about the return of Jesus at the Battle of Armageddon. It's about the nations of the earth coming to battle in Israel and Jesus returning with the saints and setting up his earthly kingdom, putting down the nations, the government of man, and instituting the government of God in the earth. And it's about Israel proclaiming, believing in their Messiah and understanding the Messiah and trying to convince them and show them beforehand in the days leading up to it about their Messiah. That's why you have 144,000 evangelists running throughout Israel in the book of the Revelation. You've got 144,000 Jewish evangelists, and you've got two witnesses talking to them in the streets of Jerusalem about who Messiah is. So with that understanding, if you understand the book of the Revelation, it's not about the United States. It's not about other nations or regions or anything. Its focus is Israel. It includes other things in worldwide events. Yeah, I understand that. But its focus is Israel. Its focus is on the return of Jesus at the Battle of Armageddon. Its focus is on Israel. Number two, a message had to make sense to the original hearers or readers. You know, when Paul's writing to the Romans or he's writing to the Ephesians, whatever he's writing has to make sense to them. We come along 2,000 years later and we can apply it to our lives, and the Father can quicken a verse to us. But in the original writing, it had to make sense to those to whom it was sent. And so when the Apostle John writes the book of the Revelation, he writes down what he sees and starts distributing it to the churches, they had to understand what it was about. All right? So let's go right to it. Without talking about the friends of the bridegroom, without going into the history of Moses and everything else and Elijah and all of that, let's just pick it up right in the transfiguration of Luke chapter 9, verses 29 through 36. Now, in verse 31 in particular, it says, Moses and Elijah appeared to Jesus and talked to him about his death, which would happen in Jerusalem. Why Moses and Elijah? The reason is Moses represents the law, Elijah represents the prophets. And so as a result of that, Moses would have spoken to Jesus out of the law, out of the types and the shadows that are there in the tabernacle. He could have talked to him about the Day of Atonement in Leviticus chapter 16, and how there are two goats, which are a type of the dual nature of the Messiah. And the one goat's blood was sacrificed and shed in the Holy of Holies. And that is a type and a picture of Jesus when he was resurrected in John chapter 20. He told Mary, stop holding on to me. I've got to ascend to my Father. And I'll appear to you later, but right now I've got to go to the Father. And Hebrews chapter 9 tells us that Jesus ascended into heaven and he presented himself before the Father God as the final sacrifice. And Moses could have talked to him about that, but he could have also talked to him about the dual nature. Along with that goat that was sacrificed and its blood shed in the Holy of Holies, there was the scapegoat. The scapegoat went into the wilderness experience to experience a very lonely death at the hand of God himself. And Moses could have explained how Jesus would cry out on the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me? As he who knew no sin became sin for us, as Paul wrote in to the Corinthians. And Moses could have talked to him about all those things. And Elijah, of course, would have talked to him from the Psalms and the prophecies in there. He could have talked to him about Isaiah and all the prophecies in Isaiah. So that by the law and the prophets, these two things, law and the prophets, remember that, these two things, the law and the prophets, they spoke to Jesus about his death that he would fulfill. So we fast forward. Let's stay in Luke and go from chapter 9. Let's go to verse 20 or chapter 24. On the road to Emmaus in Luke chapter 24, in verses 25 through 27, and it's especially verse 25, it says this, that Jesus spoke to them. He says, beginning at Moses and all the prophets, he spoke to them what all the things concerning himself. Beginning at Moses and all the prophets, he spoke to them. So here is the risen Lord convincing a couple of Jewish men the fact that he is the Messiah out of the law and the prophets. He's explaining all these things to them on the two on the road to Emmaus. That's Luke 24, verses 25 through 27. So staying in Luke, that same day, he visits the disciples behind closed doors. And it's in verse 44. It's Luke 24, verse 44. And he talks about how they're slow to believe and everything else. And it says this, he says, this is what I was talking to you about when I was with you, and all the things that would be fulfilled, which are written in Moses and all the prophets. So there now the risen Lord is not just to the road, not just on the two to Emmaus, but now with his disciples behind closed door. He's speaking to Moses and the prophets and explaining all the things concerning himself. Flash forward. What do you suppose he's going to use to convince Israel that he himself is the Messiah? The 144,000, yeah, what do they believe? They believe in Jesus. So here we come to the two witnesses in the Revelation, chapter 11. And remember, this makes sense to the original readers of this. And so what does it say in verse 6? They have the power. One has the power to shut off the rain. Now, if you're first century, who shut off the rain in Israel? Who shut off the rain? It was Elijah. And the other one has the power to turn water to blood and to hit the earth with plagues as often as he wants. Who is that? That's Moses. So Moses and Elijah are the two witnesses. They are the ones, Moses will continue to hit the earth with plagues, turn water to blood at will. Elijah will turn on the rain. He'll turn off the rain during the days of their prophesying. And you may sit there and say, okay, I've got a problem with this, John. I thought, what about Enoch? Well, Enoch doesn't mean anything to Israel. He was before Noah. And it's always been Moses and Elijah, the friends of the bridegroom, the law and the prophets. Again, as they appeared to Jesus, it wasn't Enoch who appeared to Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration. It was Moses and Elijah appeared to talk from the law and the prophets about his death. That's the method the risen Lord used to prove to the Israelites, his friends, who he was, and it's who the two witnesses are. And you say, okay, what about Moses? I mean, he died. Deuteronomy 34. Read Deuteronomy 34. It's about the death of Moses and how the Lord buried him in a grave that nobody knows where Moses was buried. But also Jude and verse 9. Verse 9 in the book of Jude. It says this, that Michael, who is the archangel in charge of Israel, we're told that in Daniel chapter 12 and verse 1, that Michael is the angel in charge of Israel. That Michael rebuked the devil and took possession of the body of Moses. So Deuteronomy 34 tells us that the Lord himself buried Moses, and then it says that Michael took possession of the body of Moses. Why? Because Moses is going to be raised from the dead, just like Lazarus was, just like the widow's son, the widow of Nain's son. God tells us that he does something. He doesn't tell us how he does it. So I can't explain to you the mechanics of it. I don't know how that works. I can't fit it in. All we're told is that God will do it, and we're told that Moses and Elijah are the two witnesses. What about Elijah? He was carried away. Yes, and his spirit and soul would have been in paradise with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, the beggar from Luke chapter 16, verses 19 through 31. He would have been there. How he's going to use Elijah's body, whatever happened, I don't know. All I know is those two witnesses are very clear that the law and the prophets are going to be used to convince Israel of their Messiah. And that's what it's all about. It's very simple. So don't be like a child tossed to and fro by somebody saying, I'm one of the witnesses or anything else. Go to scripture, go to history. Realize it would have made sense to the first century hearers because anybody who heard it would understand that's Moses and Elijah. God bless. Hope this is a blessing.